This happened to me when I was a kid, probably 11. I haven't told anyone this story because we aren't supposed to talk about them in my culture. If you talk about them, they gain an attraction towards you and focus on you more. For clarification, I am a Native American male, Apache and Navajo from Arizona, and my Navajo side is from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I somewhat know what they are and know about them. We take them very seriously if one is spotted, and even the Navajo police will come out to investigate the area. Anyway, on to my story about when I saw one. My family and I live in Arizona, and we occasionally visit our Navajo family in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We left early to get there by noon or less. It is a very long and boring trip there. But we get there before noon and we have time to mess around and talk with our extended family. And we, kids, start to play around till the evening starts to show. The house is too small for everyone to fit and sleep in. Some of the kids have to sleep in the trailer and truck camper, but two of my cousins and I had the amazing luck of sleeping in the old, slightly torn tent. It's nighttime now, around 8 p.m., and all of us get ready for bed. We are well asleep at this point, and for some unknown reason, I wake up. Of course, I'm still tired and rubbing my eyes while yawning, meaning I wasn't well aware of my surroundings. Once I finish rubbing my eyes, I look straight at the entrance of the tent and see a figure illuminated by the back porch light standing in front of the tent. At first I was scared, but thought it was my other cousins just messing with us. As I was thinking this, I thought, why would they go through this much trouble of staying up late just to have the off chance of us waking up and seeing them? As this person was still standing outside our tent looking at us, I turned to one of my older cousins who was 2 years older than me to wake him up and tell him that someone was standing outside of our tent. He tries to brush me off, but I persist and he turns to me and asks me what I wanted. I tell him to look at the entrance of the tent, and he does. I've never seen someone go from the brink of sleep to sheer panic and alertness in their eyes that fast before. He looks at me with this panicked face and tells me to be quiet. He whispers to me that it's a skinwalker and that we need to be quiet again. We lay there for the longest time, and from my memory it was at least an hour or more. We were just about to go back to sleep because it hadn't done anything. Then it started to walk around the tent, in a pace so insanely slow that it kept us up. Remember when I said this was an old tent? Yeah, it had some holes in it. One of the holes was the size of a quarter, and I decided to be brave. As it continues to walk around the tent a fourth time, I slowly crawl towards the hole and try to take a look. As I did this, my cousin told me to get back to the bed or it'll hurt us. Of course, as a kid, I ignored the warning. I'm at the quarter-size hole and looking out to see whatever it was. It comes around the hole, and what I saw was bone-chilling. When I looked out that hole, I saw what I believed to be a skinwalker. Well, its lower half and not its face, thank God. What I saw was dirt or coal-covered legs and some kind of makeshift animal pelt. I bolt back and hide under my sleeping bag while my cousin does the same. This thing decided to stop moving and start looking at us again, as if it knew that I saw it and it was letting me know. Now it continues to stand there again and watch us. I hid under the covers until I spent every ounce of energy being scared, and finally fell asleep. I woke up early, maybe around 5, and I decided to look around the tent to see if there was anything there. I see footprints, bare footprints that send shivers throughout my body. I saw the footprints move around the tent. This hit me hard because I was now realizing it wasn't a dream. As I further investigate the footprints, I noticed that it went off track. It went off to the rocky hills nearby where we were staying at. I follow the track to the hills, about a football field away from the house. As I continue to follow the tracks, something strange and scary happens. It goes from two footprints walking for a while to footprints and handprints in the dirt starting to form. I found that kinda strange because no person would do that out here. As I followed the tracks further into the hills, the hands and feet started to get smaller and smaller. This is when I started to get scared again. It then subtly changed into coyote paw prints. That is when I stopped and turned back home, first walking fast, then onto a full-on run. When I got back, I sat down on the back porch for a while and thought about telling my family, but I didn't think that they would believe me. In the end, I didn't tell anyone, even the cousin I woke up in the middle of the night, mostly because it seemed outlandish and sounded like what a kid would tell to get attention. Well, that's my story. I urge you guys to not go into the Navajo reservation to go looking for them. You will bite off more than you can chew. We, my people, take these beings very seriously and do our best to not talk about them. Even though I broke this code, I just thought to warn you guys about them. Whoever is listening are the first people to hear this story. I had a few more stories to tell, but this is by far the scariest one I had.
I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up chopping and gathering firewood for my grandmother because it was getting dark. Driving back on a dirt road at about 30 miles per hour, give or take 5 miles, I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window on passenger side, my uncle quickly shouted, "Don't!" I completely froze. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest, then completely stopped when I heard a tap, tap on my window. My uncle sped up and was loudly praying in my native language. I didn't know what was going on and thought that it was over till our truck suddenly dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me, don't turn away," over and over. Then I heard it again, tap, tap, but from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe, and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed, and then the truck dipped again. My uncle looked around and sighed. It was quiet, besides the truck and the road. He looked at me and said, "We'll ask your father to do a prayer in the morning, so the evil will forget our faces," or the Navajo to English equivalent. I remember curling up on the seat and just staring at the radio, watching the time, listening to my uncle sing an old prayer, till we got to my grandmother's house.
Let me preface this by saying I'm generally not very superstitious, but I do have my fair share of experiences that have made me a little closer to believing in the supernatural. I recently learned about skinwalkers, and this experience came back to me when I learned what they were. I'm a Boy Scout, currently 14 years old. This experience happened about 2 years ago, right after I joined Boy Scouts. My troop was on a campout somewhere out in the country, and there were woods on one side of us and fields on all others. The first day and night passed by as normal, playing around, cooking food, and trying to cope with having no service. The second day was different. A lot of the scouts had gone out for a hike on a requirement, so they would be gone for at least 2 hours. I didn't have much to do, so I walked over by the stream by the woods and sat down. Amidst my aimless rock throwing and life contemplating, I began to gaze into the woods. I wasn't expecting to see anything other than squirrels or birds, but I saw one of the scouts that had gone out on the hike. They hadn't been gone for more than 5 minutes, so I was assuming he was taking a bathroom break before the hike. I yelled "Hey" and waved at him. I could tell he heard me because he turned his head toward me, but when he did it, it was a very jerky motion. Now, I didn't see much wrong with this. I just thought that he was startled. However, it was somewhat odd that his head just snapped directly toward me. He didn't say anything and just turned back and walked into the woods. That also didn't raise any suspicion because I just assumed he didn't want to be witnessed relieving himself. Later that night, most of the scouts and leaders had gone into their tents to sleep. However, my friend and I were still both sitting at the table that we had set up talking. This was when I saw something walking upright about 100 yards away up on a hill. It looked like the guy I had seen earlier in the woods. I suddenly stopped talking and looked at it, following it intently with my eyes, trying to see where it would go. My friend turned and looked, but later said that he didn't see anything. The actual scout was in his tent. I had seen him go in earlier. I brushed it off as me just seeing things, and we eventually went to bed. The next morning, we all packed up and waited for our parents. I had the urge to pee, so I went back near the woods. After I finished, I took one last look at the woods. I saw the boy again. He was staring straight at me. His eyes were glassy and glossed over. He said nothing, turned around and walked into the woods, moving like a robot. I immediately ran back to the group, but told nobody. This is the first time I have told anyone this story. I don't know what that thing that looked like my friend was, but whatever it was, I know it wasn't human.
My family owns a farm in the heart of an Indian reservation. One winter I was home for Christmas taking care of the farm, while my parents were away Christmas shopping. I was home by myself way late in the night, and I hear all the cows freaking out. I knew that it had to be the wild dogs that are rampant in the area, so I threw on some boots, grabbed a shotgun, loaded it up, and head out to the field. This was a perfect scenario for a horror movie. It was cloudy, but there was a full moon, and it was breaking through the clouds, making it just right to light up all the snow. I ran out into the middle of the field, and just in time I see two giant dogs. They were standing up, facing each other and fighting. I think perfect 2 for 1. So I pumped the shell into the chamber of Mr. 12 gauge, and then it happened. The two dogs heard the rack, they both stopped, looked over at me, and ran away. On their back legs. Immediately I froze, and every ghost story about skinwalkers and all the other native legends I grew up with flew through my mind. Keep in mind, I'm a white guy, and up until then, these were all just boogeyman stories the native kids like to tell to scare us. That night, they became real to me.
Go, Wolfie, go.
So I live in Colorado, and I absolutely love the outdoors. I know a lot of random, out-of-the-way places which are rather secluded. One of my favorite spots to go just so happens to be the least frequented trail that I've ever seen. Me and my friends have seen rattlesnakes, mountain lions, and elk in that area, none of which you want to walk up on and scare, but we've never feared for our safety here. And that changed one summer day. Me and my friend Anthony decided this particular place would be a great spot to build a hut of sorts to hang out in, smoke pot, and shoot the shit. The trail starts out on the other side of a river that's knee-deep in the right spots. We can cross just fine. As we were drying off our feet and putting our boots back on, a ranger was coming down the hill. The look on his face was a peculiar mix of confusion and something we couldn't quite put our fingers on. He stopped to talk to us and asked, "What are you boys doing up here?" We were caught off guard at the simple fact that he was here. In the 10 or 15 times we've hiked this spot, we've only seen others 2 of the times. We were just going for a hike. Are we trespassing?" I asked curiously because of his accusing tone, and the fact that it was an unmarked trail off the side of the road. No, just rarely see people here. You boys be safe up there." He seemed like he wanted to say something else, but we got the feeling he wanted to leave fast. As he was saying this, as he started wading across the river, paying no mind to taking off his boots or socks. We quickly forgot about this, and we headed up the 45-degree incline that the trail started out on. We continued up a box canyon and slowly made it up the trail. When we got about halfway up the trail, we decided to veer off of it and find a spot to build our hut. Around a mile off the trail, we came up on a large granite outcropping with a small ravine right through the middle. This was as good a spot as any, and we started clearing the ground. For about an hour, we dug out a foundation and started gathering wood for the structure. We had the groundwork for a mini lodge and decided to make it partially underground. We dug down about 1.5 feet and hit a sheet of rock. My shovel struck the rock first, and in about a second, an intense vibration starting in my hands spread through my body. I looked over at Anthony and watched as his shovel struck the rock. It was easy to tell that we were experiencing the same sensation. It took all of my willpower to let go of the shovel, and the instant my grip loosened, it stopped. We were awestruck at what just transpired. As I looked at Anthony, completely dumbfounded, I saw a large, lanky figure on top of the outcropping. Its ill-proportioned arms jutted out with what I imagined was its finger pointing in the direction we came from. I yelled for us to get out of here, and we instantly started running. This was the one time I ever feared for my life. Ever. We made it down to the river in 15-20 minutes. It normally took an hour. Once we hit the shore, we caught our breaths and collected our thoughts. "Did you see that shit, dude?" I basically yelled. "I think I'm looking at it right now," he choked out. I turned around and saw it standing on the ridge, seemingly staring at us. It was odd how dark the area around it was. The sun was shining with barely any clouds in the sky, and yet it seemed that the darkness was embracing it. I looked back at Anthony and he had the same look on his face as the ranger did. That was 2 years ago, and I've yet to go back. Since then, I refuse to hike solo anywhere. I guess that goes to show that you don't know what the hell is out there, and you need to respect the wilderness, because you might just piss something off.
I'm a 24-year-old male now, but this story takes place when I was about 14 years old. Growing up, I lived in a neighborhood on the edge of a small desert town in Southern California. Running along the west side of this town is a huge winding canyon with a small river running through it. And as a kid, me and my friends spent a lot of time running through it and exploring it. Directly across the street from the house I lived in at the time is some type of electrical station. Just to the right of that is an old field. This old field is at the top of the river bottom and then levels of more old fields after that, like huge curved steps leading down to the bottom. By fields, I mean that they were once used for agricultural purposes, but at this point they were basically just huge overgrown dirt lots. Well, one night, a group of at least 6 of us decided to go camp overnight down in the dirt lots and just told our parents that we were staying at a friend's house. We just planned on having a fire, playing some guitar, and drinking a couple of beers. Like I mentioned before, there are multiple levels here and the hills in between each level are pretty steep. But there is a dirt road that runs along the side and goes all the way down to the bottom. The road starts right next to the entrance gate of the electrical station, which is only a couple of 100 feet from the street and has a bright light illuminating the area around it. Let's just call it the entrance light. So we walked down a couple of levels and set up at the bottom of the second to last hill, not too far from the dirt road. We get a fire going, play some music, and start having a pretty cool time. We were being pretty loud though and had a pretty big fire going. So every once in a while, one of us would run up the steep hill behind us to take a look around and make sure that the fire wasn't getting too big. At some point, I walked off to take a leak. And on the way back, I decided to make a quick run up the hill to make sure the coast was clear. I take a quick scan around and see something moving around by the top of the road, which I can only see because of the entrance light behind whatever it was. I back up and move down the hill a bit so only my head is peeking over. I try to signal down the guys, but no one is paying attention to me. When I look back up, my eyes adjust more and I see what looks like the silhouette of a man, not walking back and forth, but walking in a circle, a tight circle. My first thought was, maybe they're on the phone, but then I see both arms swinging at their sides. I don't know exactly what time it was, but I remember that it was pretty late. What the hell was this person doing out here in the middle of the night by themselves, walking in circles? I can hear the guys behind me still laughing and talking. I turn back and see my friend Paul heading up the hill to see what I was doing. I signaled for him to keep low and pointed up at the person. Not long after, all of our heads were lined up peeking over the top of the hill. We were all giggling and whispering to each other, trying to figure out what the hell this person was doing. The longer we watched though, and the more we paid attention, the creepier it got. Something about the way they moved was just unnatural. We start breaking back into whispered conversation when the person stops. They turn and face our direction. The moon was out that night, but we were a few hundred yards away and in the dark, so I was sure that they couldn't see or hear us. But it really felt like they could, like they were looking right at us. I took a glance back and saw that the fire had died down some, so I know that it wasn't that. Then all of a sudden they start walking, not down the dirt road next to them, but down the rough, steep hill in front of them, out of the light, out of sight, directly towards us. We all flipped out and went flailing down the hill. We got to the bottom and started grabbing our stuff and kicking out the fire. The only place to really go or hide was further down the river bottom, or to a large tree a little further down the road surrounded by thick bushes. I grabbed my guitar and started running towards the tree, which was maybe 100 yards away. Not even halfway there, I look over and about 30 feet away I see a tent floating across the field next to me because someone decided that they were going to bring the whole damn tent with us to hide. It was actually pretty hilarious. You couldn't see their legs or anything. Just this big-ass tent still put together bounding across a damn field. Anyways, all of us, including the impressively sturdy tent, made it to the tree. Me, thinking that the person would be coming straight down the hill and not down the road, I went around and hid on the far side between some bushes. A minute or two passes and we quiet down. Then we start to hear very clear, heavy footsteps getting closer, but they're from the road. Me and my buddy Larry are right next to the road, only a couple of small bushes separating us. We sat there with our pocket knives out just in case, and the steps continued getting closer. I want to mention that at this point I wasn't exactly shitting myself. It was really creepy, but it was more just this bizarre thing that was happening. What happens next though, I still can't explain. And this is what still freaks me out about this night. The footsteps were loud and they were getting really close. They make their way towards the end of the bushes right next to me, of course, and they stop. They were maybe 5 feet away from us. Me and Larry look at each other in complete confusion. We just sit there, holding our knives, listening and waiting. After a few minutes of silence, I can't stand it anymore. As slowly and quietly as possible, I stand up and peek out into the road, fully expecting to see someone standing there, but I don't see anything. I walk out of the bushes and out onto the road. There was absolutely nothing there. It was so quiet out there that whoever this was couldn't have gone in any direction, or really moved at all without us hearing it. But there I stood, and there was nothing. They just vanished. I called everyone out and we just stood there on the road, confused. Eventually, we all left because we definitely weren't going to stay there. We all ended up crashing at my house that night. One of the strangest and creepiest experiences I've ever had. I live in Columbia, Missouri. I'm 25 now, but this event took place when I was 17 and still in high school. My family used to own roughly 60 acres south-ish of Columbia that backed right up to the Missouri River. When you stood at the highest point at the rear of the property, you could see the river snaking through the bottoms. It was a sight to see, one I really miss. In my high school years, before we sold the property in 2011 when I had since left for college, I would routinely drive to the property on weekends and camp in the backfield in the bed of my truck. Our property was surrounded by native burial mounds, however, there weren't any directly on our property. What we did have was a small cemetery set back a bit in the trees towards the rear of the property. I was sitting in the bed of my truck one particular fall evening that I had chosen to head down and camp. I had brush hogged a large clearing in the field I was sitting in the weekend before. I was enjoying my sweet tea in silence of the rural Missouri countryside when, on the opposite side of the clearing that was up against the woods, close to the small cemetery we had, I noticed a figure. The moon wasn't bright on this night and I couldn't tell what exactly this thing was. However, I knew it wasn't any wild animal I had ever seen or that is native to central Missouri. It looked somewhat human, but definitely wasn't. It moved slow and awkwardly and had weird angular-looking limbs. The only thing I could clearly see was its eyes when it stopped and looked at me. My God, I had never seen anything like it to that point in my young life or since. They weren't glowing per se, but I could see them clearly as if this thing wanted me to fear it just by looking at its eyes. We were locked in for about 3 seconds when it made an awful screaming type noise. The closest I could relate it to is what I would imagine gravel in a garbage disposal would sound like. That's when I decided it was time to get out of Dodge and go home to sleep. It never advanced towards me or threatened me, but when it looked at me, a feeling of dread I've never matched again washed in. The purest form of dread you can imagine. Once I had clambered my way back into the truck and started driving out, I saw it turn around and skulk back into the woods towards the small cemetery previously mentioned. I have no idea what I actually saw, but the only thing I can think of is a skinwalker considering the native burial mounds and cemetery. That explanation doesn't make much sense either, since skinwalkers are generally entities seen in the southwest United States of America, not central Missouri river bluffs. If anyone has an idea of what it may have been other than that, I'd welcome input. The Osage and Missouri tribes are the ones that inhabited this area of Missouri, just for general information. Concluding my story, as I mentioned previously, we sold the property in 2011. So I can't go back to provide any more details that may be relevant. I never camped on the property again, and whenever I did go back to brush hog or help the neighbor bale the hay, I always felt a bit of dread in that back field. I've been holding off on sharing this because I'm still kind of shaken from it. My family has always been hunters and usually stick to the same places when it comes to said hunts. My great-grandfather took my grandfather, grandfather took my mom took me. It was always a good time going. This last year, during the deer and bear hunts, we went to San Juan Elk Ridge in southern Utah just like every other year. It's a really beautiful area next to a Native American reservation and another area called Beef Basin. Yeah, stupid name, right? So we set up our canvas wall tent, we being granddad, mom, and I, and we get camp all cozy and livable. At around 3:30 p.m., my grandpa and I went for a hike to see what we could find. With bears in the area, both of us always had guns on us. We had been here many times before, and both of us knew where we were at all times. But this hike felt different, like that stereotypical someone's watching me feeling. And I could tell it wasn't just me because my fearless 67-year-old granddad was gripping his rifle a little tighter than usual. That's when I heard the whispers. Not loud enough to understand what they were saying, but loud enough to hear. They seemed to be coming from just ahead of us in a small clearing of trees. As we came into the clearing, the whispers stopped. But we saw one of the biggest bucks we have ever seen right by the opposite tree line. So, being the hunter I was, I raised my gun and aimed for his heart. Bam, first shot misses. The deer doesn't even flinch. I can hear my grandpa whispering to shoot again. Bam, second shot hits dead on. Through my scope, I can see that I hit him and I see blood pour from the wound. But the deer doesn't drop. Instead, he turns and looks at us for a few seconds before calmly walking back into the woods. "What the fuck?" I hear my grandpa say. It was good to know that I'm not crazy and that he saw that shit too. We go over to where it was and there was no blood on the ground at all, even after we saw the deer bleeding. At that point, it was almost dark, so we decided to go back to camp to talk about this immortal-ass deer. About halfway back, we hear the whispers again, but louder this time. It's obviously a man, but we still can't make anything out. We get to camp okay and sit in the tent to tell my mom what had happened. She was pretty scared and thought we should go home, which was a shit idea considering we were 8 hours south of where we lived. So we decide to just move camp the next day and settle in for bed. I wake up in the middle of the night to heavy footsteps outside the tent. You could tell whatever it was on 2 legs and very big. The full moon was out, so when whatever it was gets to the front of the tent, I could see the silhouette of something at least 8 feet tall. It was thin as a tree branch with 2 long arms and huge scraggly antlers. I see its long arm reach to the front flap and then 3 long gray fingers start opening the door. I'm scared shitless and can't move due to fear. The flap opens enough to see the thing's face peeking in. Its eyes were like a cat's, glowing slightly green. But out of nowhere it stops and just stares at me. I'm sure it knew I was awake and scared out of my wits, but it closes the flap and walks back the way it came. That's when I passed out from fear. I woke up the next morning to my granddad and mom making breakfast and I tell them about what I saw. Then my grandpa goes on to explain that what he thinks I saw was a skinwalker. I'm not sure if this is accurate, so excuse me if I'm wrong, but this is what he told me. He said they're pretty much corrupt native shaman that can shapeshift and cast spells, which would explain the deer not dropping after being shot. Or possibly a Wendigo, which are monsters that people turn into after eating other humans. I honestly think that it was a Wendigo. After I got home that week, I read online about an old mine that collapsed in the early 1900s that blocked people in that was a few miles away from where we were. I'm sure that being locked in a mine would make your buddies look pretty tasty. Either way, that was the scariest shit I've ever seen in my life. I've never been a person to think that skinwalkers are real until 1 week ago. Last week I went camping with my mom and we were in Strawberry, Arizona. We were going to be camping for the weekend starting Friday night to Sunday afternoon. We arrived at about 6 o'clock and it was already dark. My mom started a small fire and we got working on putting up our tents. We got that done about 30 minutes later. We had our dinner, some s'mores, and went to bed. I woke up at 10 as I needed to go pee, so I got out a flashlight and went out to pee. A few moments later, I started walking back to my tent and I heard something scratching on what I assumed was wood. I stopped and I looked around. There was nothing there. I jogged back to my tent and got in. Within a few moments after I got into my tent, I heard the scratching again. It was closer now, way closer. After a minute or two, it went away. I fell asleep 15 minutes later. I was awoken to a loud screech. It sounded like it was within 20 feet of us. I didn't dare go out there with whatever that thing was. I was still half asleep and I turned on my flashlight in the tent and pointed it to the walls of the tent. Big mistake. It was attracted to my light and walked to it. I saw its silhouette come into view. It was a large figure. Everything about it seemed human at first. Then I noticed the fingers. They had what looked like to be claws instead. The height of it was larger than any person I had ever seen. Its legs were not human-like either. They looked like they belonged to a goat. It started scratching on my tent, making holes in it. I saw a part of the tall figure. Its legs were, as I described before, goat-like. I was paralyzed. The thing scratched my leg while trying to get into my tent and I kicked it. To my surprise, it didn't scratch me again whenever I did that. Then the creature started to shrink. This is the best way I can describe it. And it was what appeared to be a wolf, and it got on its back legs and ran. I shit you not, it ran on its back legs. I got a first aid kit out of my bag and wrapped my leg. The cut wasn't too deep, but it was bleeding pretty good. I got out of my tent and went into my mom's tent. She was awake and as frightened as I was. Within 15 minutes, everything was in the car and we got out of there. It was probably 3 in the morning whenever this happened and we got home at about 5 in the morning. Let's just say I'm not going camping again for a while. The user that sent me that story sent me a picture of the wound on their leg, but I don't think YouTube would allow me to show it, as there is a lot of blood. So unfortunately, I can't show you guys. The following story took place in Norway in 2015. If the wording seems a bit off, it's because the story has been translated. I was called in for a night shift on Saturday at the gas station that I used to work at. I'm 19 years old and a guy. I'm pretty short, like 5'6", but I weigh around 190 pounds. Because my lifestyle almost only aims for both powerlifting and bodybuilding, depending on which time of the year it is, I got really mad that I got that shift because I need a good night's sleep. But whatever, I needed money anyway. I shaved my head clean like I do every second day while keeping my full beard and packed 3 decent meals for the shift. I went to work at 11 p.m. and the shift was gonna last until 8 a.m. whilst being alone until 6 a.m. I don't mind working alone. Some people get paranoid and everything, but I myself have the kind of facial features and build that most people would not bother to mess with. Even though I'm a very, very nice person, it doesn't really look like I am. I had some customers while working, of course. A lot of drunk people. Since it's Saturday and in Norway, people tend to grab a burger or a hot dog at the gas station before heading home, others just there to fill up on gas. But later, at around 4 a.m. when it started to get more and more quiet, I saw a stressed out woman a few steps away from the door outside. I couldn't exactly tell what she looked like from behind the cashier desk, but I could tell that she was stressed out, standing with her arms crossed together while turning her head to the sides and turning around every now and then. I was considering to go out and ask if she needs any help, but I brushed it off and was thinking she was probably just waiting for someone. But then she looked inside and began to walk towards the entrance. She came inside, breathing in between normal and heavy, and she sat down. I greeted her with a smile, and I could tell immediately that she was a drug abuser, and that she was really stressed out. She was dressed with normal-looking clothes and looked like she was in her 20s. She kindly responded with, "Hey," with an obvious fake smile where you could tell that this person is sad behind the mask that they're putting on. She then came to the desk, asking if she could borrow my phone to call her boyfriend. She said that there were people following her and that they wanted her hurt or dead. The following conversation goes on like this. "Are they looking for you? Like right now?"
Yes. Please let me borrow your phone.
"Sure thing, but wouldn't it be better if I called the cops for you?"
No, please. All I need is to borrow your phone for a quick call.
Long story short, I told her to go sit down at a specific corner of the station where there was no glass wall so that people wouldn't be able to see her. She called her boyfriend 2 or 3 times, but nobody responded. She kindly asked me if she can log into Facebook with my phone, to see if maybe she could contact him there. I was kind of unsure about this, but I am by natural reasons very humble, maybe a little too much. Another thing was that I was standing right behind her, so there was no unacceptable things that she could do without me seeing it. So I said, "Alright, you can log into your Facebook." I told her to use the Google Chrome app to go on Facebook and not the Facebook app itself, since I hate spending time logging in and out of my account on my phone. Call me a lazy bastard, whatever. She logged in, and long story short, no response on there either. She thanked me a lot for the help and was about to walk out. I asked her if she was sure about me calling the cops or not, but she was 100% positive about me not doing it, which was weird, I thought. "Okay, well, be safe," I told her. Later on into my shift, I turned my phone on only to find out that she forgot to log out from her Facebook on the Google Chrome app. Out of curiosity, I checked the messages, which I believe every other person would probably consider doing. The most recent conversation was obviously her boyfriend, I thought. But there was nothing about "come and pick me up" or even the slightest thing that made me believe that this was her boyfriend. I checked the others below. Every fucking conversation I checked, which was about 6 or 7 of them, was either about drugs or money. Meth, coke, heroin, codeine, you name it. As humble as I am, I just felt bad for her, and I logged out without judging. 2 days later, I'm at the gym doing some deadlifts when I get a call from a number that is not registered in my contacts. I picked up. "Hello, Alan speaking." "Hello, who are you?" "Who am I? You called me and I've already said my name. Who are you?" "You called me 2 days ago in the middle of the night." "No, I didn't." And then I remembered about the girl calling her boyfriend at the gas station 2 days ago. "Oh wait, I remember. I don't know her name, but I assume you have a girlfriend?" Then I went on to explain the situation. You may think, how the hell didn't I know her name when I had her Facebook logged into my Chrome app, but I simply didn't bother to remember it. He then responded that he didn't have a girlfriend. Surprisingly, this didn't shock me at all. I could tell that she was full of shit when I saw the messages with my own eyes, but I pretended like this was something that came to me as a surprise. "Oh, really? Well, that's what she told me, and I tried to help her out after that, which I've already explained to you." "What do you know?" "What do you mean, what do I know?" "Has she told you anything? If so, I need to know right now." I was really starting to get pissed off. First of all, I was being mixed into some bullshit for no reason now. Second, getting interrupted during my workouts makes me want to rip off someone's head. "She hasn't told me anything and I'm really busy at the moment. Please don't call me again because none of this is actually my business." "It is your business. You helped her, you piece of shit." Before I hung up, I told him to fuck off, otherwise I would take this case to a level that he would regret. I mean, obviously I would never kill him or anything, I just tried to come up with some dumb shit to scare him. I got a bit frustrated too. Why the actual fuck would that girl call a psycho who obviously didn't like her? It was clear that he was mad because he thought I somehow helped her, which I still don't understand what he meant by that. So, on to the rest of the story. My neighborhood is quiet, and my town is small, so it's not hard for anybody to find anyone. It's as simple as pasting someone's phone number in a specific website and their address will most likely show up. And eventually, I happened to get a little visit. As I said, the neighborhood is very quiet after midnight, and while being in bed watching some bodybuilding videos for entertainment, I started to hear someone driving towards my area. Well, that's not normal at this time, but it happens. Eventually, I heard a car park right outside my property behind my garden, which goes a little bit uphill filled with stones and flowers. So I couldn't see the car from that point on, but I heard someone opening the car door and locking it. What the fuck was going on? I quickly grabbed my tank top and shorts. After that, I would just be silent, trying to listen for every sound that I could get. I opened my window quietly, just to be able to hear a little bit more. I could hear the man walk up the little uphill part of my garden, which made some sounds because of the stones. I won't lie, I was scared as shit. I couldn't see him either, because everything behind my garden is blocked from my point of view by tall cements for the garage. The garden uphill leads to the balcony where a big glass wall is, and that's where my little sister's room is. I went to the exit of my door and quietly walked out. I walked to the cement stairs at the side of my property, which leads me to the exact same spot as him. I could hear footsteps, and I quietly walked up the cement stairs. Then I caught a glimpse of the guy. Probably the guy I was speaking on the phone with. Keep in mind, I still don't know what the hell he wants from me and why the fuck that junkie woman called him in the first place at the gas station. I know nothing. My adrenaline was high, but got almost to its peak when he was right outside my little sister's glass wall. I was scared, but also really pissed off. No way he's going in there or trying at all. At the top of the cement stairs, I walked quick but silent until I saw that he could hear someone walk behind him just a few feet away. Then, I ran as fast as I could and pushed him with all my anger, leading him to get smashed into the wall beside my sister's glass wall, before I proceeded to get over him and hold my palm over the side of his face, pushing it down while asking what the fuck he wants. My little sister woke up, screaming, which also woke my mother up. She ran out and asked what the hell was going on. Why my dad isn't home is another story, but anyways, my family's facial expression was filled up with fear, and I told my mom to call the cops. The man said nothing, just laying still with his left hand wrapped around my right wrist because of the pressure I was holding his face down with, while my left hand was holding him down between his biceps and shoulders. He was literally resting for a few seconds before starting to resist like a horse again, but he ran out of energy fast. I would ease my palm off of his face so that he could get his head up a little bit, only to smash it down again with anger. Both he and I were breathing heavily. I stopped asking questions and my mother was on the phone with the police, always reacting with fear when the man started to resist again, but I told her it was under control. It didn't take long before the cops showed up and arrested the guy. I told them the whole story about both the girl and the guy. They were both just regular fucking drug addicts and have both been in prison previously for it. I was scared as shit and still to this day don't know why I had to be involved in this. Maybe he was just a paranoid psychopath. My lesson to you, never let some creepy stranger borrow your personal phone for situations like this. If it sounds dangerous, simply call the police to help them, and if they don't want you to, then just leave it. If you're at work, like I was, use the work phone. I had just started working a graveyard shift at a grocery store in a big city on the West Coast. We were sat in the middle of a residential area and we had at least one cashier on the floor at all times. The other cashier I worked with every night was named Barry. Barry was an old man who used to live in Chicago. I didn't learn a whole lot about him while I worked with him, as he was pretty secretive about everything. He was a nice guy though. He was the perfect example of a grumpy old man. You know, the kind that would yell, "Get off my lawn," and was absolutely fearless. They had a hired third-party security guard, and I use the word security loosely since it would be illegal for him to actually apprehend anyone. His job was to patrol the aisles in an effort to ward off thieves. On this particular evening, as I started my shift, I'd noticed a gentleman in nothing but dirty sweats lounging at our outdoor furniture display up at the front, which was only a couple yards from my station. I just ignored him and did my job since it took more brainpower than I could actually spare, and it was the busiest time of the day for us. He stayed there for a good while until our security walked up to start a conversation, and he got scared and left pretty quickly. Fairly soon after, Barry approached me and told me that the guy was a local vagrant and that if he comes back that I should let him know because he had a history of harassing customers, especially for money. Seeing as I'm a very short girl with, at the time, very little strength, I told him I would let him know and went back to scanning items. Hours passed by, and when I returned to my station, I see him at the display again. Immediately, I called back to Barry and let him know what's going on. I'd never seen someone get from the back of the store to the front in such a short amount of time. Right behind him is the security guy. The store is pretty much empty at this point, except for maybe 2 or 3 lonely shoppers getting their 2 a.m. fix of chocolate, mac and cheese, or other comfort food. I try to keep my head down as Barry confronts the homeless man. I can hear the man start to get a little bit angry, slowly building up his yelling until he startles me, and I turn around to watch what's going on. Hand on the phone to call the police if I need to. The man stands up and he's really tall, like really tall compared to all 3 of us. We all hovered around the low 5 foots and he shoves Barry back. Barry went to move forward and the guy pulls out a long knife that he must have taken from our minuscule aisle of kitchenwares, yelling about how he needs some place to sleep, and he swings at Barry, who dodged it. Security hightailed it back to me at that point and I called the police. In the meantime, it was just us 3 and this crazy hobo with a knife in an intent to hurt someone. Barry gave him space and kept his attention while I talked to dispatch. It would take them 5 minutes to get to the store. Barry tried his best to talk the man out of his frenzy, and for a while it seemed like it was working. Then the guy started advancing with a white-knuckle grip on the knife. Barry stood his ground for the most part, but the man caught up too quick and swung again. Barry tripped, and I thought for sure that was it. I was going to watch someone get stabbed and there wasn't anything I could do about it. Apparently, I had made some sort of noise because he turned back and made eye contact with me. I couldn't read his face. My mind was just blank. The security guy decided now was his time to shine and he yelled something. I can't even remember what he yelled. Probably something about the police. The man bolted and I watched through the storefront windows as he ran around the building and disappeared into the dark. The police eventually arrived and searched for him. They caught him, I heard, and he was sent to prison for aggravated assault, I believe. Barry was grumbling louder than usual, his way of expressing shock, I suppose, and we both finished our shifts before going home. That wasn't the last time I ever witnessed scuffles between Barry and aggravated people, but it was the only time they ever had a weapon. This story takes place only about 9 months ago or so, and it still works me up to this day. I've worked at GameStop for about 4 years and in multiple places, some sketchier than others. I'm a key holder there, and I often close the store, so I'm normally out around 10 p.m. The last 2 years, I've been at a rather nice GameStop in a better area, so I had discarded my habits that I had accumulated over the years for my own safety. I'm about 5'3" and pretty small. I'm aware that I'm a target for, well, nothing good. Anyway, it was about 10 p.m. and I had just closed with another employee. I don't have a car, so I had to wait for my ride, which was not out of the ordinary. She was running a little more late than usual, however. Whoever I close with always offers to wait with me until my ride shows up, but I always assure them that they can leave and that it's fine. The GameStop I work at is in a decent-sized strip mall plaza with many other stores, including a Walmart that's a little more than a quarter-mile up the parking lots. Most of the stores closed a little sooner than us, so we were typically the last ones out anyway. The associate I closed with walked across the lot and got into his car, waited about 5 minutes, and then left and waved his way by me. As he did, I noticed another car further back in the lot. It was the only car left, and I had just assumed it was someone else getting out a little late from their job. My eyes follow the associate's car all the way to the end of the plaza until he's gone. I check my phone and my batteries are low, but I can see that it's about 10:10. I was sure my ride would be here any minute. That's when I saw the other cars start to move. They must have been sitting there because no one had walked to the car since I had left my store. They didn't turn their headlights on, which was odd to me, and started the gut-wrenching feeling that it was a little weird and that I should leave. But for whatever reason, I stayed. The car drives around the lot and then slows down, near me. At this point, I have my phone out just in case, and I have my messenger bag on my shoulder in case I need to ditch it fast. He pulls up about 15 feet from me, just outside of the first handicap spot. The car stops and is still running. It's an old, gross, beat-up two-door car with rust all over it. The door opens and no lights come on. Out steps a very large man that was most likely about 6'2". He had brown, messy hair and was brolic but still lanky. His clothes were stained with sweat or grease and he looked very unwelcoming. He had casually gotten out of the car, but then he turns around and clicks his fucking front seat upward and immediately, with the door open, starts walking fast toward me. I hadn't even realized it, but I was already on my feet backing away from him. He kept eye contact and made a gesture to come back. Basically from there, I turned around and booked it to the Walmart parking lot. The sketchy guy got into his car and pulled around and started driving toward me. I don't know him. The store had been closed for over an hour. And it's dark and the lot is empty. There is no reason to be approached like this. He still had his headlights off, which absolutely terrifies me. Because I can hear him, but it's still very dark and my heart is pounding in my ears. I can't tell if he's right behind me or if he's leaving. I peek back and he's still slowly driving toward me. At this point, I'm certain I'm about to be shoved into a car and sold into human trafficking or some bullshit, and I'm in absolute panic, but all I can do is run. The Walmart was still so far away, and I was sure he would probably try to actually make an effort to get me in the car by then. I felt like he drove slowly behind me to tease me and scare me. But then I saw a big truck in the very back of the Walmart parking lot with about 5 people around it. There was another car, and their hoods were up. Someone was jump-starting a car. I hauled ass to the left in their direction since they were closer, and as soon as I felt like I was in earshot, I started screaming for them to help and that a car was chasing me. The group looked shocked, and for all I know they could have been sketchy too, but I had to take that chance. A man and a woman ran towards me and met up with me. I was pretty nervous, winded, and shaken up. I could hardly talk, but I looked back and saw the taillights of the car driving away. I walked towards the rest of the group, which was just a few people attempting to jump another car. I told them that a big guy was following me and that I felt very unsafe. They offered to call the cops, but I wasn't even able to see his plates, and I really just wanted to be home at that time. The 2 women of the group and 1 man were kind enough to walk me into the Walmart and even waited with me for my ride to arrive. I thanked them and went home. After that happened, I requested to open for about a week so I wouldn't be at the store after dark. The next day, I told my boss the time that it happened and we both watched the DVR in the back. It was incredibly uncomfortable to watch, but we forwarded it to the local police. The police didn't end up finding much, but they now keep a squad car patrolling the plaza from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. I don't take chances anymore. I wait inside the store until my ride calls me and I can see them. The whole thing really bothers me. I always felt like that type of thing only happened in the city or in unsafe places, but not to me, not here. I haven't discussed it much since, but it still bothers me. You're really never safe.
This happened to me about 6 months ago in Australia. I was walking home from a friend's house at around 2 or 3 a.m. It's about a 20-minute walk along a couple of medium-sized streets. The streets were always really quiet and empty, but I'd done this walk multiple times before without any issues. I was pretty tired and still a little tipsy, so I was just kind of going along. As I started to go up a hill, I got the sudden urge to look behind me, for no real reason, really. I glanced back and saw that a tall, skinny guy in a black hoodie was walking along the same road in the same direction as me, maybe 80 to 100 meters away. I should also mention that I'm a short female, but I wear men's clothing and hats, so I don't really have to worry about getting hassled by men as much as some other girls do. But I was still aware of the fact that we were the only 2 people around and that there was plenty of dark places along that street. So, a bit further along the walk, I glance back again and see that he's closer than he was before, like maybe 40 meters away this time. I told myself I was just being paranoid and he was only catching up to me because I was walking so slow. I still sped up a little bit though, and felt my heart beat a little faster. After 5 or so minutes of power walking, I stop at some traffic lights to cross the road. And when I stopped, I heard his footsteps behind me and realized how much he had caught up by now. He was definitely aiming to keep up with me. I immediately crossed the road, barely checking the traffic, and looked back at him from the other side. He still had his black hoodie on and we were in a dark section of the street, so I couldn't really see his face or anything. When he started to cross the road towards me, I was telling myself not to start running yet because I felt like he could probably outrun me and catch up before I could get to my house. My house is on a tiny side street coming off the larger road that we were on. I could still hear his footsteps, power walking, keeping pace just behind me. As I'm about 5 meters away from my street, I speed up a little more without actually breaking into a run. I started to cross my street, trying to act as though I was going to keep going past it down the same road. When I was about halfway across, I prayed that the high fences on either side or the darkness of the street would give me some cover. I sidestepped as far as I could into my street. I turned sharply and started absolutely sprinting as fast as I fucking could down the middle of the street. I sprinted straight past my house to the footpath at the end of my street that joins to another road. The first half of the path is stairs because it's a really steep hill up to the road. So after bounding up the stairs, 3 steps at a time, I turned around and saw the hooded guy sprinting down my street coming after me. I have never felt such a huge shot of adrenaline before in my entire life as I did when I saw him running at me. I thought I had already run as fast as I possibly could down the street and up the stairs, but the adrenaline went straight to my legs and I started flying up the last half of the steep path like it was nothing, like I was running up a moving escalator. When I got to the top, I could either turn right or left. I turned right and kept sprinting along the road past 2 houses that had high fences and hedges until I got to a house that had only a small garden bed in front of it. I jumped over the garden and crammed myself into a bush. I was so scared. I had to hold my hands over my mouth to stop panting so loudly. This street was deserted and silent, so I easily heard the hooded guy's footsteps, just pounding up the hill. I heard him stop, but he was breathing really heavy, so I peeked out to see what he was doing. He was at the top of the path, clutching his side, bent over like he was gonna puke, looking left and right up and down the street. He then made up his mind, spat on the ground, and then turned left. I watched him jog away, still looking around everywhere for me. As soon as I realized he was out of sight, I laid down on the ground and let myself pant and breathe for a bit until I felt like I could walk again. All I wanted was to be home. I kept on going to the right, further down the street, because it connected with the road I was on before, so I could circle back to my house and keep some distance from the hoodie guy. In the end, I made it home safe. I'm going to give a bit of a backstory first before I begin this story.
It's almost the end of summer, we only have about 2 weeks left, and I've been trying to cram as much activities in as possible. I'm an 18-year-old male and I don't have my license, so I have to walk and take the bus everywhere. I've never really minded though, as I like walking. So my friend and I wanted to have a night out, so at about 5 p.m. she picked me up and we got pizza and teriyaki before heading back to her house and getting high with her boyfriend. At about 2 in the morning, I decided I should get home. I didn't bother asking my friends for a ride because they were already asleep and I always felt really bad for asking for a ride, so I gathered my things and started the 5-mile walk out of town and to my house. I'm not really a paranoid person, but I always carry some form of a weapon with me just in case. Tonight, it was my pocket knife, but during the school year, I have at least 3 mini screwdrivers on me at all times. I'm a pretty big guy, 5'11", pretty built, and I'm confident enough in my ability to take care of myself. So I started this walk, high out of my mind, at 2 in the morning. I'm on my 3rd mile heading towards some apartments when I notice offhand that there is a man about 100 feet behind me. As soon as I see him, he pulls out his phone and begins talking on it. I brush it off and continue on my way home. A little ways ahead, another man comes out of the apartments and just stands in the middle of the sidewalk up ahead, effectively blocking my path. At this point, I realize that something is most definitely wrong. So I stop walking and just look at him. He's tall, maybe 6'1", and his grin was really unsettling. I hear the man from earlier before and I feel him grab my left arm and tug me sharply backward. My first reaction is to reach into my front pocket and grab my pocket knife. His friend has already started walking toward us, but he hasn't noticed that I'm reaching for anything. So it was a complete surprise to see me pull out a knife and stab his friend in the thigh. He yells and lets go of my arm and I quickly sprint away from the two of them into some bushes alongside the apartments. I stayed there for a bit. My phone had died while I was at my friend's house, otherwise I would have called for help. There was a bit of cussing and then they went searching for me, but they gave up after a while. After what felt like ages, I found myself on the main road again, blissfully alone. The rest of my walk was okay and I never ran into anyone after that. I made it home safely. This story goes back a few years ago when I was a 17-year-old high school student. Every day I'd walk the 25 or 30-minute journey to and from school. There was a shortcut I could take to my house that took some time off of the walk, and as a nature lover, the shortcut was very enjoyable. I've included a diagram since the setting of this story is not very easy to describe, and sorry for my shitty 3D representation. I'll put it on screen right now. Whenever I'd walk home alone, I would take this shortcut to enjoy the small amount of forest we have in this medium-sized, moderately busy city I live in. My shortcut was pretty well traveled and I would occasionally see some other people walking from their neighborhood towards the busy streets close by, or other students walking home from my high school or the college. But other times, there would be nobody except me on the path. To give you an idea, the path was definitely not groomed, but it was traveled enough you could make out a path from being trampled over the years. The shortcut started off from a busy road by my high school and went into a low-lying open wooded area with some small ponds. After a few minutes of this, I could veer right up the big hill towards the street parallel to my street. One day, I was walking home from school after staying